Hey guys, welcome to Collected Edition, the comic book show where I force my father-in-law to read comics because he's too polite to say no. I'm Caden.
And I'm Dan.
And I'm Brianna.
Oh, look, my actual wife saw it. This week, I decided that we were going to take a look at Avengers Disassembled by Brian Michael Bendis and David Finch. So at this point, like, Bendis is like the golden boy of Marvel, and he will continue to be the golden boy of Marvel for like the next 10 years after this book is published. Dan, what did you think of this book?
I have some mixed feelings about this book. There's some really amazing parts in it that I think are fantastic. There's some depth to the story. The art is incredible, and the coloring's amazing. But there's also some thematic elements that I struggled with a little bit.
I love this book. I don't know. This is the first Avengers book that I've ever read. I've never read an Avengers book before. I was super happy to read this one, and I really enjoyed it the whole way through. I think it checked most of the boxes of what I want in a superhero book, so it was great.
So I guess for me, I'm going to roll the dial back, pre-2012, pre-MCU. As far as I was concerned, before the Avengers movies were big, the Avengers were like D-listers as far as I was concerned. The Avengers were the book I could care less about as a little kid. For me, the big three at Marvel was, and I think a lot of people will agree that the big three of Marvel throughout the 90s and the early 2000s were Spider-Man, Wolverine, and by extension, the X-Men, and the Incredible Hulk.
Oh, interesting. I maybe thought the Fantastic Four would be on that list.
I mean,
well.
The Fantastic Four, they were always kind of like, if you're a hardcore Marvel fan, you are a Fantastic Four fan, I think. But the Avengers for me was just the rest. I like, everybody likes and respects Captain America. Iron Man was there for me. Thor is kind of cool, but every other Avenger, and I think this book does a really good job of showing you that. Like, every other Avenger was utterly disposable as far as I was concerned. The story of this, it picks up, I think, I might be wrong, but it picks up after the end of Kurt Busiek's Avengers run. But when Bendis looked at the Avengers, he was like, so why aren't Wolverine and Spider-Man on this team? And he needed to facilitate a series of events to get them there. So this book opens up in what I think is a classic Avengers fashion now that I'm an adult and I've actually read Avengers books. But they're just hanging out in Avengers Mansion, which, if for most of you, if you guys haven't read a comic book, Avengers Tower that's in the MCU, that'll be created in the next Avengers series, New Avengers. But Avengers Mansion is actually really the mainstay centerpiece of the Avengers as far as like their base is concerned. I guess there's also like the Hydro base that they have, I think, in the 80s and 90s. But, Avengers Mansion is the nostalgic one. And they're just kind of there, like, shooting the breeze. Hawkeye is talking about how if he could have the chance, he would bang Madam Hydra.
Great. It's a great introduction. I'm like, oh, great. So these are just dudes, like, hanging out, talking, I guess.
Well, and at least, like, She-Hulk and the Wasp acknowledge that Hawkeye's being a pig. But, they're just shooting the breeze when Jack of Hearts, which for me is emblematic of how forgettable the Avengers are. Jack of Hearts is a character I could not care less about, but he rolls up and they're like, oh no, Jack died on our last mission. So Scott Lang, Ant-Man runs out, and boom, Jack of Hearts blows up, immediately evaporates Ant-Man. Then we hard cut to Tony Stark, who is the Secretary of Defense at this point in the Marvel Universe. And the Avengers are UN sanctioned, and he's, pitching the UN on why the Avengers should essentially have more leeway and more funding. When Tony Stark, realistically, this is Bendis remembering the one famous Iron Man story at this point, which is Demon in a Bottle, which is Tony Stark dealing with alcoholism. And Tony Stark gets drunk on the UN world stage, seemingly, and threatens.
He's all sweaty and he's sweaty. Like yelling, and he's like cussing people out. Oh man,
he wants to blow away the Latvian representative in the UN.
Come on, guys, who's with me?
Yeah, for real.
He does have one of the best lines in the book for me. When Hank Pym, Yellow Jacket, tries to call him up, he tells him to shove it, and he asks, don't you have a wife to beat right now?
Like, there we go. Tony Stark and Hank Pym's two defining characteristics.
Yeah, alcoholism and domestic disputes.
Woo-hoo.
It's essentially, the premise of this book is really just the Avengers' worst day ever. Tony is drunk on the world stage. Ant-Man and Jack of Hearts just immediately blow up on the front lawn. Vision shows up and just starts spitting Ultron robots everywhere, and he says, "Guys, I'm sorry, this isn't me." What did you guys think of these opening few issues where we just see the piss taken out of the Avengers?
Well, man, it's so funny because it's so funny to like I can't help but compare like the way that things would be going with the Justice League versus the way that they're going with the Avengers. And just I obviously this is their worst day ever, but just to see the kinds of problems that are happening and how they respond to them, it's very human and a little uncomfortable to watch play out. You're like, "Oh my gosh, like these people are just
They're
people,
people.
right?" They're
Yeah.
and they're yelling at each other and they can't agree on how to proceed. And it is, there's name calling and, there's breakdowns and there's, just hiding down, shutting down and hiding in a corner, right? And I don't know, it was brutal to watch it all play out. And it's relentless. There's no break for them.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's no letting up the entire time, and I agree. It's very human. It's very messy. This is clearly another instance of one of those teams that's not really a team. They're at best, most of them are buddies with somebody else, but nobody's a buddy with everybody, except maybe Captain America. But that's just because he is who he is, right? But even so, everybody gets their least favorite thing thrown in their face at some
Yeah.
point, right? And that's a theme that we continue coming back to throughout the entire rest of the series.
Well, and I think one of the confrontations that I like the most, where we see how human these guys are, is they have this brief respite to, gather and regroup. And we see, Captain Britain is in the hospital, Ant-Man is in the morgue, Wasp is in the hospital, and Falcon, Hawkeye, Captain America, and Iron Man and Yellow Jacket, they're all conferencing in the hospital courtyard. And Hawkeye was like, our existence has begged for this to happen. Is that at any point we were just waiting for us to have the worst day ever, and that's today.
That seems remarkably insightful. And even though he's somewhat off base in his estimations, he's also fundamentally not wrong.
Yeah.
It's so funny because you read it and you heard insightful. When I read it, I saw, oh, that's Hawkeye just being like flippant and dismissive as he usually is. From, again, my little exposure to Hawkeye.
But the thing is he's correct. If Cap was saying this, or because the thing is it Falcon that agrees with him? Falcon is like, yeah, no, like it's the same conversation that they have in Civil War, where the Civil War movie, where it's like, oh, by the nature of our very existence, we invite challenge, and it was only a matter of time before all of those happened at once, is essentially Hawkeye's point. Tony's relationship with alcohol is very realistic for me in this point, because he gets drunk on a essentially live television. And the president of the United States is unwilling to, talk to him. He just sends the Joint Chief of Staff to dismiss him as Secretary of Defense. And nobody on the Avengers is willing to believe that Tony didn't have a drink, because that's the big thing. Is Tony's like, I haven't had a drink. I've been sober this entire time, but I know for a fact I'm drunk. Something's happening to me. And despite everything else that's going around, nobody's willing to believe Tony, except for maybe Cap.
Yeah, that was something that I was going to mention, is just the fact that I think out of everybody, Tony has the most reason to think something is seriously wrong here, because he knows that to be true for himself, but he can't get anybody else to believe him.
And because of that, he lashes out.
Yeah, lashes out and detaches and runs away, right? Like he can't handle the having that brought into question, his loyalty to the team, his loyalty to his principles, and being questioned in that way is just too big for him to take on, right? You see something a little bit similar, I thought, like another one who kind of breaks up more than I would have expected is Nick Fury. Like Nick is constantly like, you guys need to clear this crime scene. And not only do they not like pay attention to, they don't even, they just ignore him. It's like he didn't say anything, right? And we revisit this a few times in a row, and by the end, you can almost hear like the not tearing up, but like the frustration of like, what is happening? This is, people respect my authority, and it's not happening.
Well, and I think the context with Fury is very important because they get this alert at the Avengers Mansion while they're at the hospital and they return. And every character in the Marvel universe, I think it's pretty much everybody who has been an Avenger or a reserve Avenger at some point, is at the mansion, and they're looking to help. And I think the thing with Fury being ignored, for me, I enjoy it because it shows the superhero community rallying around. Because even though I make fun of the Avengers and I think they're the D-listers, within the context of the universe, they are the premier superhero team. And it shows the Marvel universe rallying around them and trying to be there for them and trying to support them, which is something I do enjoy, is even though in the main Avengers team, we see these fractures and we see these really human, ugly disputes, the Marvel universe as a whole is rallying behind them and trying to help them.
Yeah, I really like that. I tagged it in my notes as like the one non-dysfunctional relationship expression in the entire series, right? Is, everything else has something to it that's like, but just that community support of we're here for you. What can we do? Is I thought that was well established and it affected me.
Yeah. Well, but it barely gets to last like whatsoever because they show up and then all of a sudden the Kree attack. Yeah,
Right.
which at this point, okay, we've got Ultron and Vision, we've got the Kree, we have Jack of Hearts exploding, which is the most recent Avengers story. So realistically, we're hitting all of like the greatest hits as with the Avengers as far as their history is concerned. That's not. I think that's something that you guys will pick up on later when you read the epilogue, where they do kind of go over the biggest Avengers moments in their history. But for me, as like a fan of the Marvel universe, even though I'm not an Avengers fan, seeing this play out, it is kind of cool. But the thing is the Kree invasion, it doesn't go so hot, especially for Hawkeye, who I would say arguably does have a great moment. Is they're all getting blown up, and then Hawkeye just rolls up with like 5 quivers and is decked out to the nines and just starts taking out Kree.
And then
everywhere.
30 seconds later, he gets lasered down, right?
Which, with his famous last words of "not like this, not like this,"
right, yeah.
which is not particularly noble or dignifying, but he does get to make a pretty sweet suicide run.
That's right.
That's
Can
true,
we just
yeah.
take a minute? Can we just take a minute and focus on my favorite little tiny detail of the book, and that is the written Cree language in the dialogues. So that's a simple substitution cipher, and you can actually decode it to English.
Oh, really?
Cool. Yeah. What's the cipher?
Yeah, so it says insert threatening alien Cree font dialogue exclamation point.
Oh
So
my
that's
god.
That's awesome.
And then, so that happens twice. The first time you see it, that's what it says. The third time you see it, it says the same thing, but without the word threatening. And then in the middle one, it actually says, "You want to tell me what's going on here, soldier?" Which happens before Captain America's line. And so it's like, oh, that's interesting, because that's exactly what he says. I'm like, why did they pick those things to put into that code, right?
Well, I bet that's just what was written in the script. Like, I need to figure out. I'm looking through my physical copy right now, and I'm just trying to figure out who did the lettering.
The lettering?
Yeah.
That's what I was just gonna ask. Who did it? That's so cool.
It looks like it was Albert Deschentes. Good job, Albert, I guess, for
Right.
rocking the lettering game. Once Hawkeye makes his suicide run, the Kree just evaporate. And Doctor Strange shows up and he just lays into him and he says, "Hey, there's clear abuse of magic here. What's going on?" And Cap just says,
actually, the first thing he says is the magics are being abused, right? And then we go to the next issue, and when you pick him up next, he's like, "And let me tell you all of my qualifications for why I'm the best magic user in the world," right? Which is, you could have cut that whole panel on the top page, and it would have affected the plot not at all. It was all about
necessary.
Right.
Well, it's Stephen Strange doing what he does best, telling everybody else how much better he is than everybody.
Right. Yep. Very, very much in character.
But he shows up and Cap kind of knows what's going on, but then we cut back to a few months earlier, where we see Wasp and Scarlet Witch, who was with Tony at the UN, but has mysteriously disappeared during the whole playing out of all these, tragedies in the Avengers' worst day ever. And Janet is clearly day drinking at the pool, which again is just showing how human these characters are. And she's confiding in Wanda how her and Hawkeye have had a pregnancy scare, and how Hawkeye is not mature enough to talk about it with her, and how happy she is that her time of the month has come and that she knows she's not pregnant. And she makes this passing remark to Wanda about, I don't know how you and Vision did it. And Wanda's like, what? And this is a very big part of Wanda's character. For me, Wanda's been a character that I really like, but has often been abused by male writers in the course of her existence. So in the 1980s, she and Vision were on the West Coast Avengers. While they were on the West Coast Avengers, Wanda and Vision had 2 children, which were created by Steve Englehart. Well, John Byrne takes over the book, and he's like, yeah, that's stupid. So he retcons that the children were magically created by Wanda subconsciously through her powers, and were actually slivers of Mephisto, Marvel's version of the devil. They were slivers of his soul that she siphoned off to create these children. And demon children. And Agatha Harkness rolls up and she's like, hey, we can't have Mephisto have access to her through these kids. So we're going to mind whammy her and erase any knowledge of these children to her, which is, I would argue, is pretty monstrous on the Avengers end.
It's an awful decision.
Well, and then Janet just casually gets drunk and mentions it, which
just mentions it. Wipe it from Janet's brain too.
Right. Yeah, no kidding. This was a question I had that didn't make a lot of sense to me, being naive about stuff, right? But it seems like everybody, including Blabbermouth Janet, knows about what happened to Wanda's kids. And they tell this to Stephen Strange, and he's like, I delivered those kids myself. What happened to her children? So how does he not know, this master of magic who is there with the magic lady delivering her children, and then the day drinking lady knows about it, but he doesn't? What's up with that?
So at this point, Stephen Strange, the Marvel universe isn't as unified as the MCU would like you to believe sometimes. Doctor Strange is off doing his own thing all the time. He's in other dimensions fighting interdimensional demons and stuff. So it makes sense to me that they wouldn't tell him. But I do think at the same time, if he is the master of the mystic arts that he claims to be in this book, you would think that as he delivers babies, both as a medical professional and as the, supreme sorcerer of our dimension, he would be like, oh yeah, these are weird demon babies.
Yeah, there's something wrong with their souls.
Miss Marvel Carol Danvers is like, oh no, these kids were created through chaos magic. And Doctor Strange is like, what the hell is a chaos magic?
It's like, that is not real. You made that up.
He's like, I am a professional in this field. That's not a real thing. Because Scarlet Witch is a mutant, and her mutant ability is magic. However that works with your genes. Don't think about it too hard, I guess is the answer. But, he's like, no, she's just raw, unchecked power, and she has no clue how to use it. And if somebody has raw, unchecked power, they're going to lose touch with reality. If reality can be whatever they want it to be, they're going to have no concept of what true reality is, which is another concept I think is really interesting.
Yeah, I like that one. I think it's a good insight into the mind of the creator, and it's one of those. I'm always kind of on the lookout for what principles do people accept as being true, kind of, either in a given, subset, like this small set of issues that we're looking at, or, within a larger contextual universe, right? Like, what are the principles people see as being true? And that's one that comes up time and time again, right? You see it with Spider-Man in its positive sense, and this in its negative sense with Wanda.
Well, and at the same time, I think it also serves as a meta text. If you look back throughout the 80s, is often Scarlet Witch is this powerhouse of a character, but is at the subject of either the male writers or male characters in the books that she's in. And I think Bendis is kind of playing on this, whether he's doing it consciously or not, where he's talking about this woman is suffering constant emotional whiplash, and this is her breaking point, and now she's taking it out on you guys because I would argue that the Avengers, to a degree, are her abusers in some form.
Well, and did Wanda join the Avengers just as I know they go into this a little bit. But her and her brother were pretty
Pietro.
young. Yeah, they
They
were
were
pretty
like,
young when
teenagers. Yeah.
they
Like,
joined, and like obviously there's a whole range of ages among prominent superheroes and everything, but just
everybody's perpetually 30.
right, but just to be a kid and to be leaving your home country and to find your place, and we'll talk about this more later, but to find your place with these Avengers and then essentially have them be your family, but then to have them treat you in this way, and as you mentioned, has been treated this way by editorial and by other male characters in the team. It's easy for me to believe, like, oh, I can
You would snap.
see exactly.
And then we cut back to Wanda, and the way she finds out about all this is she confronts Agatha Harkness. Originally, she was created to be Franklin Richards' nanny. She eventually trains Scarlet Witch how to use her magic to a greater degree, and we see Wanda kill her, and she's living in this weird dollhouse simulation of her life with her children that she's recreated.
Going back to that theme of how everybody gets their weakness thrown back in their face, their weakness, their vulnerability, their insecurity, something like that, right? I was looking for each one specifically to kind of call it out, and the one that I got for Cap was like two-part, right? On the one hand, his entire team falls apart, which he would take as a personal failure, being the leader of them, right? The
Well,
whole thing
it's
disintegrates.
also his only grounding in the 21st century.
That's right. Yeah, it's the only thing that he really is part of, right? To
Mhm.
make him present. But then the second one is he apparently has had this growing close relationship with Wanda Maximoff, and he's the one who realizes first when Doctor Strange brings it up. Oh no, he says, "I know what's going on," right? And then we see
He's
it
the one
kind of
that confronts
unfold.
her.
Yeah, exactly. He's the one who goes and tries to be that bridge, right? And it just totally fails.
Well, and it totally snaps, and she just rolls up on all of them because she's playing Dollhouse in the mansion itself, and she rolls out, and I don't know. I'm not a big Carol Danvers fan, and this book is part of it because she's kind of a monster in this book. Because Wanda shows up to confront the Avengers once they know she's the cause of all their strife, and she just lays into her, which to some degree, I guess now that I'm thinking about it, she killed several of their friends, but they immediately go at it, and Wanda creates an illusion version of each Avenger, and they're all stuck fighting themselves till Doctor Strange shows up and mind whammies her. Do you have anything fun to say about this font, Daniel, or is it just
I looked. I really did. I looked, but no, nobody seems to think that there was anything legitimate in those words.
Either way, he mind whammies her and knocks her out, and they roll in to the Avengers mansion where they find a dead Agatha Harkness, and Magneto rolls up and he says, "Give me my daughter," which I don't know. Magneto is a lot of things. A good father is not one of them. At this point in Marvel continuity, they've always played ping pong with Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver, whether or not they were actually his children. They were, then they weren't, then they were again. They currently aren't because they retconned that out when Fox owned the X-Men movie rights and they wanted to distance them. But by the time you're probably watching this in the future, I'm willing to bet they're his biological children again. And for all intents and purposes, they're still his children as far as the writers are concerned. But he looks down at Wanda, and he does have this good moment where he says, "Xavier was right. I failed you," and he takes her and leaves.
Mhm.
But that's essentially the end of the main story. We do cut back and we see a flashback of Wanda and Pietro joining the team, but really that's kind of the end of the story. Is that we see the Avengers' worst day ever, and the epilogue is them meeting at Avengers Mansion sometime later, and Tony essentially saying like, "Hey, that blow up at the UN didn't do the Avengers any favor. We've lost our UN funding, and in classic Iron Man fashion, my stocks are down and I need to worry about that. So I can't fund the Avengers anymore," which is fair. I get it. But like Iron Man's losing his company like every other issue. So it didn't really faze me. But they
That's what
do have
passes
this.
for tragedy there.
Yeah. It's like, what do we know about Tony Stark? Wouldn't it be interesting if Tony Stark lost his company and all of his tech and he had to make a new suit to deal with it. I've seen about 5 Iron Man runs do that in the past 20 years.
Great.
But then, Quicksilver, her brother, shows up and he apologizes. And, he's gone before they can even say anything to him. But they do have this nice moment where they reflect on all their favorite moments as Avengers, which I do think is funny because some of the characters, they quickly run out of... Bendis quickly runs out of which Avenger stories he's actually read, and he just reminisces on the ones he remembers. So even if the character wasn't there, he's like, you know what, that one was the best one ever.
I don't
this
know.
was really... go ahead, Bria.
I don't know. It could be on purpose. I mean, who is it that says, maybe maybe this tells to the fact that we were more in love with the idea of being an Avenger and never actually the actual experience of it. So maybe it was on purpose. I do think you're right, though, that there probably is a little bit of like, oh yeah, these are the ones that, stand out in my brain and this is what I got. So
yeah.
What were you going to say, Dad?
I was mixed on this because on the one hand, it was interesting to kind of get this slideshow back through time, this retrospective of the greatest hits, right? But also and this isn't necessarily a criticism, but some people take it that way, right? It was very much a Grey Haven's farewell, right? Like end of Return of the King, where it's like a 20-minute goodbye between all of the characters. I'll miss you most of all, Scarecrow, like it was just it kind of went on longer than I expected for the for the emotional impact of it, I guess.
Well, and that's exactly actually how I felt rereading this. Is I'm just like, okay, like, and maybe it's because I didn't read this when it came out. I jumped immediately into New Avengers, and I was like, Spider-Man is on the team, Wolverine's on the team. Let's rock and roll. And as far as this is concerned, I'm like, yeah, whatever. Like, I'm not 40. I don't care. Let's get to the characters I like.
It's kind of funny because I do feel like it goes on for a long time. I think you're definitely right about that. But I also think part of that is because they're just so stuck on it. Like, I feel like they can't get away from it, and they're just sitting there and they're just talking and they're making sure everybody talks about, even Jarvis. They're like, what about you, Jarvis? Right. And like just all of it's like they can't let it go, even though they do. But I do think, again, even at this end where it's, if anything, but like triumphant, really, you see kind of the very flawed elements of them. Hank and Janet are back together.
Yeah. Well,
maybe?
and
Yes.
that's like a terrible moment in the book. Is Hank is like, while he's he doesn't show up to the big fight at the end because he's at Janet's bedside, and he's like, you know what? The only thing yet you were worse at than being a wife was being an ex-wife.
An ex-wife,
like,
exactly. Yeah, just like, having them all be back in this space and, to admit their own flaws, but then also to be like so unaware of them. Like, I can see how it'd be very refreshing to go into a new team with like characters you care about who, still have problems, but maybe not quite like this.
Well, like Wolverine is an a-hole, but like he's also fun to watch be an a-hole. It's not kind of uncomfortable. He just wants to bang another guy's wife. That's not as problematic as being like, there's nothing more that I hate than my ex-wife, but baby, we should get back together. Granted, it's not as bad as like Ultimates.
As previously discussed. Yeah.
As previously discussed. No, go for it, Daniel.
Oh, I was just going to, is that by the end, they're all like, okay, we're going to buy into this collective idea of the Avengers that we knew being largely an unreservedly good thing, right? And I think that touches on a powerful psychological dynamic.
I think you're right. I'm really glad you made that comparison just because I was having a hard time putting it into words, but I think that's a great comparison, especially like at the end where they do go out and somebody asks, who's the guy with the black suit with the W?
Oh, Wonder Man.
Oh, Wonder Man. Sorry, I don't know these people.
He's an actor.
Oh, fun. And he said, "Did anybody actually show up?" And Iron Man's like, "Are you serious?" And they go out there, and it's
It's
just like
everybody.
so many people. And I do think that's so cool. And I do think that that really touches on what you were getting at, Dad, where it's like, okay, yeah, once we can kind of let go of this idea that maybe we were all this, good thing, maybe we can actually be there for the good things that are actually there.
Well, and I think at the same time, we complain about these characters being human. That's what I love about Marvel Comics a lot
Yeah, not
more
a
so than
complaint.
you know,
Not a complaint.
but and that's always been in the DNA. Is every Marvel character has had that like human element in there, much more so, just in the sense that they have character flaws and they have shortcomings and they have internal conflict, and that's just fun to read. As much as I like to bash on the Pyms, Hank Pym was a main character of West Coast Avengers, and I was here for it. And he wasn't even a superhero at the time; he was just Hank Pym, and it was really fun to watch and really fun to read this. I don't know. Do you think it does a good job? I guess, yeah, that comparison, Daniel, of it being a eulogy is really interesting. For you guys who've only had experience to essentially the MCU Avengers, yeah, what was your guys' thoughts on this book in comparison to your greater understanding of them as a whole?
So this was the main problem I had with this series, and it's come into a little sharper definition for me as we've talked about it, and that is that I felt very claustrophobic reading this. Like I felt very very constrained, and I was trying to figure out why. And in part, you mentioned everybody's human in this, but who never gets a chance to really be anything other than what fate has decreed, which you could read that to be narrative requirements or editorial force or whatever, right? I have the same problem with the WandaVision television show, that I had with this book, and that is that Wanda never gets a fair shake. We've talked about it here, but it really brought it into clarity for me. There's never a time when Wanda gets to be Wanda on screen, and it seems like it's all totally inevitable. Everybody's working against her. She has no allies. The ones that she does have are torn from her in the worst possible way. She's forced to push them away from herself, on her own. Again, narratively or editorially or however you want to call that. And to me, it left me with a very, like, to me, when there's a story that's so constrained by fate, to me that does feel nihilistic. It feels
Hmm.
meaning free, as if it doesn't really, as if the choices don't really affect anything. And to me, that's like the tragedy of this particular story, is that Wanda, it seems to me to be a total victim of whatever forces are at play here at whatever level you care to, talk about them.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I do think that, and we did kind of skip over it a little bit because I don't think there's, a whole ton to go into there. But one of the things that I do like, and maybe I'm reading into it too much, is the backstory, where you get a little bit of like Wanda and
Pietro.
Pietro, thank you, um, joining the Avengers for the first time, and you do get to see her before, after obviously some dramatic life experiences for sure, but also like pre-Avengers and pre everything that kind of like caused all of this to happen. And I do think that even though, there's not a whole ton of time dedicated to that, I did like that they at least were like, look, this is not always how it was, and here it is how it was set up. And I guess when I read it, I was like, oh, look at like, the possibility for like how things could have gone, or like look at the perspective um of starting it at the beginning. And again, like I don't know what happens to Wanda after this. Probably a lot of this, that, and the other.
She gets her own event where I think you guys are going to have a lot of the same issues. I think we'll probably tackle it here eventually. As I want to tackle all of the 2000 Marvel from like 2000 to 2010 is just like they have like a yearly event, and you could follow it linearly. It's like this one giant story. Most of them are written by Bendis, with the exception of I think like Civil War. Um, but she does get a whole event written around her, and I'm really interested to see if you guys will have this same thought Actually, no, she gets 2 events written around her. Um, and I'm really interested to see if you guys have those same issues or if we start to branch out from there.
Well, that's kind of just what's interesting is that despite the fact that, Bendis doesn't give a whole lot of time to like acknowledge where Wanda is at, I did like the flashback because to me it did feel like it gave Wanda at least a little bit of room to breathe as a character where it's like, okay, yes, there's a potential for her and it's like we're starting at the beginning again for Wanda and Bendis has no control over what happens to her after. Maybe did he lead that event? I don't know. But
He
I
led
guess
one of them, yes.
right, and I guess so it's like, where the character goes after this, we shall see. But I did think it was worth bringing up.
Yeah, and I guess I'd be interested I didn't read this month to month at the time. I would eventually read the follow-up series month to month, but with this being the way that it is, I can only imagine like that how you would feel if you were a hardcore Avengers fan. I'm sure this would leave you gutted. But I think in a lot of ways, a lot of its shortcomings are in the fact that even as I was reading it, it's to move us to that place where we want to be in the future while trying to be as respectful as we can. Granted, at the same time, you're just wiping out Hawkeye and Ant-Man. Don't worry, it's comics. They're back.
As always.
But I think in a lot of ways it is to just speed run us to that next event. I don't know. Is there anything else that you guys wanted to mention about this book, or?
I just wanted to bring up briefly that I really appreciate the art changes, obviously in the flashback, and then also when they go through and talk about each of the different, stories that they liked, having that art change completely of the styles. Oh, it was so cool, and I love that.
Yeah, let me look at it. It is, so it's David Finch, Frank DeMarta, Steve Epting, Michael Gaydos, Eric Powell, David Mack. David Mack has like my favorite spread in this. He has the watercolor of Vision and Scarlet Witch being together.
Scarlet Witch, yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know. It's Steve McNiven, George Perez. George Perez's art is amazing. It's just it's a who's who of best artists at the time, and I think that is also another fun thing. Is now were there any points of continuity that you guys were confused on? I guess that's another big thing that I was interested in.
I don't know. A lot of it has to do with the fact that I don't know who a lot of these people are. So
it doesn't matter because they die.
Exactly. Well, the ones who die, I know.
Yeah, they're action figures now. Little kids dress up as Ant-Man for Halloween. I can only imagine that in today's world, if somebody said, "I want to do this," and a Disney executive would swoop down upon the Marvel offices like a bird of prey and shut this down immediately.
Can't just go killing off characters because they've never done that before. Choice, because was it her goal to not be found out? I don't know. And again, these are questions that don't really matter.
I think this ties into our greater problem of it all is I don't even think Wanda knows what she's doing.
Yeah, and that's called out specifically, right? One of the other characters brings that up. I think it's Doctor Strange who brings it up. She may not even recognize it, and it's interesting. I had a whole other set of notes trying to pick apart. What were they trying to say? On a reread where I know everything that's coming, right? Then what hints are there, right? And when she's talking to herself, she calls herself stupid. You're so stupid, right? And she's there when Tony breaks down. She doesn't. At the time, I interpreted the first time through, I interpreted it as her offering comfort to Tony, but she's not. Her face is always in shadow. She doesn't ever. In fact, she accuses him a little bit. And I think my interpretation of what's going on with her reality altering powers is she has decided to be self-deluded. To give in to her own illusion, right? Mm-hmm. Because that's what's safest for her.
Well, and House of M, which is the story, the major Marvel event that follows this up, that follows up all the Wanda stuff, plays directly into that. Is her fulfilling that to the maximum degree, and her doing it in a way that appeases or is trying to appease the Avengers. And it's interesting. I like House of M a lot. I don't know. I love Bendis's dialogue. For me, like he has this like snappy, like it's like Gilmore Girls dialogue in a comic book. But the back and forth is just great. It's very realistic dialogue for me. I don't know. Is that I guess it's Whedon-esque is the way I would describe it.
I love Bendis' stuff, and almost everything I've read. I haven't again read a ton, but everything I've read of Bendis I've really liked.
I had just one. You guys mentioned your favorite line. You know, when Stark is snapping back at Hank Pym, right? But
well, I don't know if that's my favorite
not
line.
favorite line.
It
okay,
is my favorite line.
Yeah, not surprised. But yeah, so my favorite one I think is when we're sitting there talking, listening to everybody talk about, slowly come around to the idea that it's Wanda. It was her. And Spider-Man just goes, and she married a robot.
I love
And
it.
they dedicate an entire panel to just this total like.
And he's like, well, she did.
If I was dating a robot, you'd all talk about me behind my back. Yes, man, go.
No, Peter being Peter. Like,
I love that.
Yeah, I don't know. I love it. So yeah, we'll probably check out New Avengers here soon, maybe next week, because honestly, there's a big movie coming out called Thunderbolts. They've been really marketing an asterisk there. I'm willing to bet by the end of the movie, it's going to be Thunderbolts asterisk New Avengers in the fine print. But even though the comic is going to have nothing to do with that movie, so I guess that's it. Unless you guys have anything else to say. Okay, awesome. Well, thank you guys for watching this episode. I hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you guys next week. Bye. Which were actually my favorite version of the Avengers as a kid. My only affinity for the Avengers as a child was, I don't know where I got them, but I just had tons of West Coast Avengers back issues from the 80s, probably because nobody else wanted them. But I'm like, who I care about is the Magic Lady and the robot.